Hi students, my name is Michelle Rogers and this is my very dear friend Lisa Falbo. Lisa and I did not grow up together. In fact, we didn't meet until well into our adulthood. But Lisa and I are forever bonded through our boys. We'd like to take a minute and introduce you to our sons.
This is my son Sam.
And this is my son Clay.
We are going to take a few minutes just to tell you a little bit about each of their stories. My son Sam lost his life to an overdose. Clay also lost his life to an overdose. My son Sam died when he was 27 years old. My son was also, when he passed away, a world-renowned knife maker. These are just a few of the knives that he made in his lifetime. People all over the world have collected his knives. And when Sam was 14 years old, he decided that he was going to go hang with some skateboarding friends. He was very much into the skateboarding world. And some of you guys might be kind of into that same thing. And he decided he was just going to hang out with the friends. And he decided one day he was just going to smoke some pot. So smoked the weed.
Probably seemed harmless at the time.
Yep, seemed very harmless at the time. Even I, as a mom, thought, you know, smoking pot's pretty harmless, I would have said back in those days. So Sam just succumbed to peer pressure, basically, is what he succumbed to. And long story short, he just, from those early days of smoking weed, he just decided that, well, I'm going to go ahead and try a pill. And then from that point on, he tried a few more pills and kind of just got into that partying time of his life as in early teenage years, 15, 16 years old, that we all think is, you know, just kind of part of growing up. That you're going to have those friends that you hang out with and, you know, just do some of those partying type things, experimenting with drugs, experimenting with alcohol, smoking in the closet, vaping now, those types of things that you just think is part of growing up, experimenting, and peer pressure. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't always stop there. It doesn't always stop there. There are many things that can add to those trying and experimenting with those drugs. Addiction is a real thing. And you never know when you are taking that first drug or smoking that first joint or drinking that first drink of alcohol, whether you might just be predisposed to addiction. And that is a very real thing.
Absolutely.
And I am here to attest to that as Sam's mom. And I am here to speak on behalf of his very short life, that addiction and substance use and substance overdose is real. I am sure that pretty much everybody that's listening to this video has been touched in some way or knows somebody that has a struggle with alcohol, a struggle with smoking, a struggle with substance use in some way or another. Tell us a little bit about Clay.
Okay. Clay lost his life 2 years ago, and he was 29 years old. And I'm going to share some pictures of Clay. These are pictures of Clay throughout his life. He grew up right here in Haywood County. He played baseball for Tuscola. He went to Western Carolina University. He was very successful. Really didn't experience the peer pressure thing, so our stories are a little bit different. Clay had a surgery when he was in his early 20s. It was a sinus surgery, and he was prescribed prescription pain pills. Unbeknownst to us, Clay became addicted to those pain pills and called his doctor for refills, and his doctor refilled them a few times, and then when the doctor no longer refilled them, he started buying them on the street from people he knew or people he was introduced to. His pill addiction got worse as the years progressed, and he he was in that treatment for 6 years. He battled this for 6 years. The thing is, Clay had no idea, and we had no idea, that he was predisposed to addiction. And it happened, and it shattered our family. And when Clay passed away, it was later determined that he was killed with a fatal dose of fentanyl.
Yes.
Now, if you're not familiar with fentanyl, fentanyl is a legal drug that is used in severe cases of very monitored pain. It takes a teeny tiny bit of fentanyl to kill a person.
It's about the size of a grain of sugar.
Yes. And something that is important in our message that we want to get across is my son didn't know he was getting fentanyl. He thought he was getting another opioid or pain related medication. He was actually thought he was getting heroin. Often pain pill addiction leads to heroin addiction. Heroin is cheaper and it's easier to get. But the fentanyl tragically took my son's life, as it does many young people's lives. What we want you guys to understand is that drug use of any kind can lead to drug abuse very quickly, which then can ultimately lead to death. I'm not saying that everybody that uses drugs is going to end up as Clay and Sam did. But neither one of these precious kids that we loved with all our hearts ever thought that the pills that they took or the drugs that they took was going to lead to the end of their life.
Exactly. They didn't know that choice, that first choice in Sam's case, that he just thought it was just a harmless smoking of a joint or that harmless pill, was going to lead to something that took over every day, every hour of his life, was the need for those drugs, which is what happens. It takes over lives.
It absolutely took over Clay's life. As I said, my son went to Western. He had a great career. He owned a house at a very young age. His life was all headed in the right direction. And when he became addicted to these pain pills, these pills cost a lot of money. And he would get paid and pay his bills, and he would buy his pills. And as what happens with drug addiction is the more drugs you take, the more your body needs to feel that high or to feel
normal.
Or to feel normal, thank you. And what happened with Clay is he then started selling things that were precious to him. His hunting rifles, his hunting bows, because he was running out of money. And this is a vicious cycle that drug addiction can lead to. Part of what Lisa is talking about it taking over your life. Then his entire life became a circle. And I actually found a drawing that my son made one time when he was in treatment, and it was a picture of himself. It was a little stick person, but he said, "This is me." And he drew an arrow to when he takes a drug, and then he drew an arrow to how sad he feels for what he realized is happening to his life, but then back to himself and back to needing that drug to not feel sad and ashamed. And Clay was always ashamed, and it was something so difficult for him to deal with. And I think it just snuck up on him. Do you think that happened with Sam?
Yes, I do. I think that happened with Sam. Yeah, definitely. definitely. I think also, I don't think that they, at those younger years, at least, for Sam in particular, now Clay was a little bit more toward adulthood when he, but
he was still young.
Yeah, still young. He did not realize what addiction even was. You know, and maybe some of you don't realize exactly what addiction is, and I'm not going to get into the medical stuff of what addiction is, but it happens in the brain. Your brain basically gets sick when you take that first pill or that first dozen pills, if you will.
Absolutely.
And it's not just that you need it. It is a sickness that's going on in your brain, and so you really don't have any control over it. It's not that you can just say, oh, I can be strong enough to do it and not take that pill that day, or not. It is actually that something goes on in the brain. And that's what you kind of need to be aware of is that, you know, even though you think that after taking something for a year that you're going to be able to stop because you can be strong enough, it is too late at that time because your brain has gotten the disease. And
I'm glad you used the word disease, because what I started to say is, like any disease, cancer, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, nobody knows that this is going to happen to them. So whether you take your first drug recreationally or become addicted a different way, you don't know that it's going to happen to you. So it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the chance. And listen, this may sound dramatic. And it is dramatic. And the reality is, we're not here to scare you guys. We're just sharing the truth. And our stories are real. Our stories are raw. And our stories are true. And there's not a day that goes by that Lisa and I don't miss our sons terribly. And we are here sharing with you, and we share with others. We do a lot of volunteer work in this realm because we don't want another mom to have to see their sons, on a poster board, a memorial poster board. That we are trying to help other people understand the realities of addiction, how it can start, how it can get out of control, and how you can avoid it. And so a couple things we want to say in closing. There's a couple things. Something my son shared with me before he passed away is that he didn't realize until he was an adult and looked back that even as a young student at Waynesville Middle and Tuscola, that he had experienced some form of depression, maybe even anxiety. And he never talked to us about it. We didn't recognize it in him. I don't think it was severe, but this is just something that he later acknowledged. I think that mental illness of any kind, sadness, depression, anxiety, there's a lot of that can lead to addiction.
That's what I was just going to say. That can actually be we've talked about peer pressure being an avenue. We've talked about prescriptions, pain management, surgeries being another avenue. But there also is another avenue, and that is that someone your age, younger, even 13, 12, 11, 10 years old, all the way up to adulthood, can turn to substances to mask pain and mask sadness.
I call it self-medicating.
Yeah,
I call it self-medicating.
Exactly. Cover up or trying to not think about some traumatic thing that's happened in your lifetime. We all have different stories of abuse in our lifetime, or being very scared in our lifetime, or, younger years, those kinds of things. That is another huge reason why oftentimes people turn to substances and then ultimately find themselves addicted to those substances. And that whole mental health thing, that's kind of a childhood trauma. That mental health thing is kind of a big word, but the anxiety and depression and sadness that comes along with that, and trying to cover it up.
And I know it's sometimes hard to recognize within yourself, but we really want you to understand that if you're feeling any of those emotions, any kind of sadness, depression, anxiety, if you feel out of sorts in any way, there are adults you can turn to, whether it's your parents, your school counselor, one of your teachers, maybe an aunt, uncle, grandparent, but we really encourage you to confide in somebody, right? To open up to somebody. There's no shame at all in recognizing that you feel sad.
Well, and if it's one thing, I know that Michele and I are adults, and we're moms, so you think that maybe we can't relate, but but you know what? When we didn't talk about things and kept quiet and didn't talk to each other,
Yes.
we didn't know that there were other people around us going through the exact same thing. And that is something that you, even in 7th grade, 6th grade, can relate to. We may be 50-ish, but we found out in our 50s that if we had just started talking to somebody else, we would have found out how many people there were going through the same thing, just like us. And I dare you to talk to somebody else if you are struggling with something. And you know what? You're going to find out there's a whole lot of people going through the exact same thing. And just having one other person to talk to about your feelings and what you're going through can make all the difference in the world, and opening up and realizing that there actually are a lot of people going through the same thing.
Absolutely. And I promise you that you will feel so much better after you open up to someone, and maybe even get professional help. But it will be a burden off of your shoulders, because you know what? Masking that sadness is draining. It's physically and emotionally draining, trying to be normal, if you will. But so that's definitely an avenue. But also, I wanted Lisa to speak briefly on maybe some strategies that you can use in a peer pressure situation.
Yeah, peer pressure is really, I don't even know if you guys call it peer pressure these days.
But I'm sure they know what it means.
But I think one of the biggest things and tips that I could give as far as peer pressure goes is to, if you're comfortable going through this scenario with your parents, if you have a good relationship with your parents, having strategies in place that if you happen to go to a party and you are uncomfortable with what's going on at that party, you see people drinking, whatever the case may be, have something you've already got laid out with your parents, a plan in place that you can just call and say, have a code word. Come up with some code word. And then next thing you know, your parents are there ready to take you home and get you out of that situation. So you've practiced some of these scenarios. Practice, what you might say to that friend that comes up to you and offers you a joint, or says, hey, you want to try one of these pills, or practice what you are going to say to them in response to that, so you already have it in your mind. You're not thrown off. You just or tempted, worse yet, to go ahead and take that pill. But have those scenarios played out in your mind.
Absolutely.
And that way you are fully prepared when that situation arises, to exit yourself out of the situation, and then maybe not feel foolish necessarily, or feel like, you're the one that had to go home from the party and just be, you've rehearsed it.
Hey, listen, practice in front of a mirror if you have to. It seems dorky and silly, but it's one of the ways that you learn how to public speak. It's one of the ways that you can practice things that you have to recite in front of your class. So why not practice a response? So just the more you say it, the more comfortable you'll be. And then you just can ease through that situation. So we're going to wrap it up. And we are honored to speak to you kids. And we just really wanted to share our story and our truth. We don't want any of you to find yourselves in a situation that our boys did. And we just want you to
stay strong.
Stay strong. We want you to know your own value, know your own worth, and be your own person. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.